Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Piss. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 17th of April 2024. If you are going to ignore my breaking news update, very short video I did just before. This is a military aid video. Again, quite a bit to say. There's a lot to say today in general. There's a lot of content coming out today because all sorts is going on around the world. I appreciate that many of you come to me for your news first, so thank you for that trust. We're going to start with the military aid here in the context of Ukraine ramping up their production. Zelensky said yesterday that more than 40% of all weapons used on the front for the defense of Ukraine are produced in Ukraine. I think you've got to take these claims with a pinch of salt, and by that I mean not he's necessarily being inaccurate. It's just really difficult to work out what you mean by 40% of all weapons. Do you mean all small arms ammunition? Does that include 40% of that? You've got millions of those. And what if you make way more of those in Ukraine, like individual bullets in Ukraine, but far fewer tanks? Are you just talking about one bullet and what is worth the same as one tank? So when you talk about 40% of all weapons, is that ammunition as well as weapons? On all of these different sort of little quirks of the claim there. But anyway, you get the point, is that actually there's an awful lot of Ukrainian stuff now on the front lines compared to previously, not least in terms of, say, the Bogdana 2S-22 self-propelled howitzer, where they're producing somewhere between, they said significantly more than 18. They're trying to produce 40 a month, and that will be over one a day. That's fantastic, and that'll be, you would imagine, over and above replacement numbers. Ukraine will do more and more to guarantee its security and need its own technical advantage so that Russia knows and will respond to every blow, said Zelensky. Also, we hear that Ukraine has massively increased its domestic long-range missile production, reportedly over 700% in the last year, per the Strategic Industries Minister Smetanin. I would be, again, a bit wary about these kind of figures because 700% sounds brilliant, and it is. That's 7 times what they were producing. But if they were only producing 1 missile a month, that's now 7 missiles a month. If they were producing 100 and now that's 700, then that's massive. But I have a feeling their missile production was really, really low previously. So I'd be very interested to know how many missiles they're now producing. But anyway, that's moving in absolutely the right direction. Ukrainian missile production has increased 2,100% since 2022. Now, that's probably something like 1 a month there, and then now 21 a month. So actually, that's good. But what are those missiles? Are they all, top quality? I don't know. Missiles with really good payload, that are really accurate, good CEP, and good range, or is that the whole range of missiles? Some of them are pretty dodgy. Are we talking about Trembita ones that are fairly low tech? We're talking about ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. There's a lot of detail I'd love to know about their missile production because, and the reason why I go on about that, I think it's one of the most important aspects to them being able to cause as much damage to the Russians as possible. I've said since the beginning of the war, they need to be ramping up production of long-range munitions because that is a way of destroying Russian equipment, materiel, personnel, and industrial capacity without losing a single Ukrainian soldier. Throw in missiles and drones to, the range of 100 to 1,000 kilometers, and with enough of them, you are going to damage Russia's ability to prosecute the war without losing any soldiers. It's really, really important that they produce as many of these as possible. They've got, the claim here is they've got new systems like the Neptune long-range missile, LACM, entering service. That's a cruise missile there. That's the Long Neptune, that's what it's called, and lots of others. We heard yesterday of the new BARS. I think that's a drone missile, together with, say, the Peklo. Then you got the Paliantia, and then Long Neptune and others to boot, no doubt. Now, Shashank Joshi reports in The Economist that my colleagues recently reported that the DoD officials, Department of Defense in the US, had asked one ally to stop sending arms to Ukraine. I reported this yesterday. It's worth repeating here in the military aid piece here. That's concerning. But worth noting that most allies I have asked about this say that they have not had similar requests. This is not a general policy, brackety yet. So what's happened? Well, the US has asked at least one other nation to not continue to support Ukraine. The US has joined the other side. I keep saying this. It is the reality of the situation, right? At least to a significant degree. They're still providing assistance in terms of intelligence and all sorts of stuff as well. But there is a definite tension in the air between I think the politics and the career military professionals. Now, this is being sort of widely reported in a number of places. Euromaidan Press here saying, according to The Economist, Trump's aides were fed up with Europe's efforts to strengthen Ukraine. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to have to read. 3 years into this war, the US is fed up of people helping Ukraine. It's just outrageous. Trump's attempt to secure a ceasefire within 100 days is faltering, no shit Sherlock, with Russia ignoring US proposals, stepping up attacks, and Trump shifting blame to Ukraine. It's what we're seeing. They've changed sides. Voting with North Korea and Russia and Belarus in the UN draft resolution yesterday on UN cooperating with the Council of Europe because the rhetoric on Russia was too harsh. It's just absolutely ridiculous. Now we hear French aid to Ukraine reporting here that following Donald Trump's alleged refusal to sell Patriot surface-to-air defense systems and missiles to Kyiv. So just to remind you, the claim is that there was a $15 billion purchase requested of 10 Patriot air defense systems, and then spending 5.5 million on an interceptor, each missile. The Ukrainians were wanting to use frozen Russian assets funding and EU funding to put a big purchase into the United States, and it appears that Trump has said no. So again, they've just changed sides. He's refusing to sell weapons that will protect human lives, will protect civilians' lives. These are placed around, yes, of course, sensitive armaments, sensitive targets like airfields and whatnot, but also just around cities like Kyiv. And Russia is being given the green light to strike Ukraine because the US is not selling them the ability to defend themselves. I think it's absolutely unconscionable. Now, I hope that's a misinterpretation of what he was saying and what's going on, but I'm pretty sure Lockheed Martin and the manufacturers of, RXT, is it? Raytheon, are going to be absolutely fuming at not being able to sell their stuff to Ukraine. Trump's party in France, so this is the Republicans abroad. This is your guy, Nicolas Conquer, Franco-American. He's the Republican overseas France blokey, and the French representative of the GOP, of the Republican Party. He has said, well, let's listen to what he said. We'll translate this. He said that, for my part, I'm not going to cynically rejoice the military-industrial complex is running at full speed to fuel a bloodbath. In other words, that the sale seems to have been blocked. He's saying, well, that would fuel a bloodbath. In other words, using Patriot missiles to shoot down incoming ballistic missiles that are going to blow up civilian areas of Kyiv, that is fueling a bloodbath. So defending yourself is fueling a bloodbath. This is the Republican at the moment. I'm sorry, I know there are many good Republicans out there watching this. At least I hope there are. But the MAGA Republicanism that has even gone to the French representatives of the GOP seems to have a completely skewed understanding of morality and this war. That you can't defend yourself because that is fueling a bloodbath. Just sit back and watch those missiles rip apart your civilian infrastructure. Just let those KN-23 North Korean ballistic missiles, because it's okay for Russia to go and get missiles from North Korea, fire them into Kyiv, but you can't shoot them down because that's fueling a bloodbath. Disgusting. I can't believe you're in this position, he says. I side with those who work for peace, where peace is just surrendering. Peace is surrendering to the Russians. Disgusting. And then we hear from, and this is going to be somewhat controversial, we hear from Jake Sullivan, the former National Security Advisor to Biden, about ATACMS and why they were not provided for a couple of years.
said we didn't provide them because it fears a World War III. I don't think that I ever said that about ATACMS. The reason why we didn't provide them originally is because the Secretary of Defense and the U.S. military told the president that the United States did not have enough of these in our inventory to meet our basic deterrence needs for the United States. And
which actually I sort of believe that, because we reported that at the time, and that was one of the reasons hanging around for ATACMS. The criticism back again is that in 2023 they didn't agree to ramping up production of these, which would have solved that whole problem. I think it was something like funding for 1,700 of these to have been built, something like that. So that, while that may be a bona fide reason, and I think that's what we were hearing from the military, he's saying it wasn't an anti-escalation position. It was just we didn't have enough of these, or at least that's what we thought at the time. And then we started seeing them coming on, being given to Ukraine once the new Prism missiles that are replacing the ATACMS started coming online. That's when you started seeing them. So that certainly did make sense, but they could have done more to build more of them, right?
Said essentially, we do not recommend or advise that these be given to another country. Over time, over the course of 2 years, we produced more. We produced enough to be able to supply Ukraine with somewhere on the several hundred ATACMS.
So he's saying they were still producing enough of these, but again, they didn't ramp up production that would have allowed Ukraine to have an absolute ton of these, which, my goodness, they really could have done with, because they did a pretty good job with their ATACMS.
So that was one piece of it. The second piece of it was that in those early months, in the period of April, May of 2022, the question of escalation was different than it was in 2024. I said in response to an earlier question that Graham asked, did we learn? And were we willing to do things later in the war that we weren't earlier in the war? And the answer to that question was yes.
Which is a very interesting admission. And I'm happy that he's being honest about this, which is, we were more scared of escalation, which, and I do understand this, which is, we're just getting involved in the war. We don't know how quick Russia is going to be, or Putin's going to be, to press the red button and whatnot. So hang on, just be careful. Don't go too crazy in supporting Ukraine. And then over time, you start to understand that every time the envelope is pushed, actually the Russians don't do anything. So then you start learning that actually we can provide this. And that's what you started seeing. It took ages, and then it was given, took ages, and then it was given. But each time they're kind of learning, and hindsight's 2020. So, it's very easy for us to sit there and criticize Jake Sullivan. I've said this before. In principle, I criticize him completely for being slow on aiding, and the administration for being slow on aiding Ukraine. But I do also understand that if you're ever going to be cautious about anything, it's about nuclear war, right? This is the one thing that could end the entire world. So if you get it wrong, that's a really big opportunity. That's a really big cost, not opportunity cost, actual cost. And so there is an understanding. I think the calculations were wrong, and that's my criticism. But again, it's easy for me to say that sitting in an armchair thousands of miles away from these guys or the war, because we were prepared to take on more risk as this went along. So part of the reason specific to ATACMS had to do with the Defense Department's objection on the number we had, and part of the overall approach that we took on a range of different decisions that the president made had to do with our learning about what the level of risk tolerance was for us to be able to supply Ukraine with what it needed, while also making sure that we didn't end up in an escalatory spiral. I would just say, in closing, that we ended up providing Ukraine with a very significant number of these systems, down to the level where, again, we basically have no more to give. And the idea that they made a major difference operationally in the war has not been borne out by the evidence. So I think a lot has been put on this ATACMS decision to... I think they did make a difference, and I think I think had they had like 5 times as many of them, they would have made even more of a difference. So, it's not like a few hundred ATACMS is going to change the entire war. No, that's impossible. few thousand, continual provision of these, and actually Ukraine would be in a much more in a much different position. So I think that's a slightly unfair interpretation there.
Suggest, oh, if only you'd given ATACMS, the war would have turned out totally differently. And yet the experience of the use of ATACMS by Ukraine on the battlefield, I think, suggests that that is not in fact the case.
No, I think the use was pretty good. Yeah, they did end up being intercepted better and better by the Russians. But, had they been given these earlier, so the idea was he's evaluating, well, when we did give them, they had some effect, but it wasn't game changer. Yeah, but by the time you'd given them, if you remember this, by the time that the US did give them, the Russians had pulled back their air force from all the airfields that could have been hit by the ATACMS originally. So that delay was a game-changing delay in Russia's favor. Like, had Ukraine been given those ATACMS at the time they wanted them, they could have arguably taken out Russia's air force ended up doing so much damage with their guided glide bombs. And then you could argue that Avdiivka might not have fallen. So I would massively argue with that interpretation at the end there. But I think it is true, because these are kind of the main reasons we're talking about, whether this is true or not, or whether this was like an accurate interpretation, but who are we to know? We're not in the US DOD. The DOD was saying we don't have enough of them. That's what we're reporting at the time, and anti-escalatory, and they learned to be more of a risk taker, the US, the National Security Council, as the war went on. And I'd agree with both of those points there. Now, European countries cannot agree on additional aid to Ukraine due to disagreements over funding and weapons production, according to Le Monde, a French newspaper. Kiev's European allies have reached a dead end, primarily because they are not participating in the peace talks between Russia and the US. As a result, European countries are not receiving information about the progress of the discussions, although the discussions are about revising the European security architecture. Of course, they are meeting today with Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff in Paris with the Ukrainians as well. Now, another stumbling block for Brussels has been the possible sending of troops to Ukraine after the ceasefire. France is in favour of redeploying ground troops, while UM is advocating for the protection of Ukraine's air and sea space. UM is there. London and some other members of the coalition are wary of sending ground troops and are pushing for a no-fly zone on the border between Russia and Ukraine. So some disagreements between the Europeans, which is really frustrating at the moment. Now, the German defense minister expressed skepticism about supplying Ukraine with long-range Taurus missiles. We've heard flip-flops on this from within Germany. This came in response to pledges of delivery by Chancellor-designate Friedrich Merz, in stark opposition to the outgoing Chancellor Olaf Scholz. But we have heard that the UK and France need to be in on this decision. The analyst says that Merz wants UK and French backing. The incoming German Chancellor, who will be sworn in on May the 6th, is seeking British and French backing for the move. And the UK, which has been urging it for 2 years, offered its immediate backing. France is expected to do so imminently, and that's what we hear. The UK will support Germany's decision to send Taurus missiles to Ukraine, according to the Daily Telegraph. However, some elements in the coalition are opposed because Germany is still full of the hand-wringing appeasement faction in some corners. It's unlikely to stop Merz, who said he wants this done from before the election and can claim a mandate to do so, as far as anyone can claim a mandate in German politics. Now, remaining on Germany, the Rheinmetall CEO, Papiger, talking about Taurus. So remember, this is a Rheinmetall CEO. This is not the company, and he's not the man that makes Taurus, right? So bear that in mind. Quote, they won't change anything in the war. The Taurus isn't a game changer. Besides, Ukraine already has cruise missiles with similar ranges. The game changer is classic artillery ammunition. Only with that can Ukraine keep the Russians at bay. Now, I somewhat disagree with this, and I think he's downplaying Taurus. I don't think Taurus will be a game changer, but they'll be damn useful. It's again, it's putting all these things together cumulatively. If they had enough ATACMS, Storm Shadows, Scout PGs, Taurus, X, Y, and Z, planes, just in general, a lot. I go to bed every night wondering, like, if I had the power, what would I give Ukraine? This is my bedtime routine, and I always come back to, I still would just give them 100 planes if I could. Like, they need an absolute ton of F-16s, Gripens, and Mirages, etc., etc. Just give them that, and then give them the munitions to go on them, and then bish bash bosh. So I disagree with Mers here. Although yes, they also need huge amounts of artillery ammunition, but I think it's both and, not either or. And he's obviously going hard on artillery ammunition, which is no surprise considering the next piece here is Rheinmetall CEO Papiga announced in an interview with Handelsblatt that the newly built artillery ammunition plant in Unterlüß could eventually produce as many as 350,000 155mm shells per year instead of the planned 200,000. It's also planned to produce significantly more than the originally planned 150,000 155mm shells per year in the plant currently under establishment and construction in Ukraine once production starts in 2026. That's still a long way off. But keep in mind that it will take several years after the production starts to reach max production capacity. In Unterlüß, for example, the plan was to produce 50,000 155mm shells in the first year, 100,000 in the second year, and 200,000 from the third year onwards. And then we hear that German defense giant Rheinmetall continues to make major steps to produce 1.1 million 155mm shells annually because it's just acquired the nitrocellulose artillery propellant manufacturer Hagedorn NC, switching the company to military production and boosting staffing, right? So Rheinmetall will switch a facility open since 1910 on the banks of the Ems River in the northwestern German town of Lingen to military nitrocellulose production in the next few months and add 90 employees, boosting staffing by 25%. This is all absolutely brilliant for Ukraine and for European security. But remember, him not really slagging off Taurus, but downplaying Taurus and upplaying artillery ammunition is, of course, in his best interests as CEO of Rheinmetall. I'm sure if Rheinmetall were making the Taurus, he'd be banging on about how good the Taurus is and how much Ukraine should have it. Northrop Grumman, the American missile manufacturer, their plant has exploded in the US, a building of the Northrop Grumman plant. And it's not the first time this has happened, of course. If you're ramping up production of all sorts, you might be rushing things. You might not be concentrating as much on safety as you should be. Or there could be sabotage. We've heard about a number of different places going up in smoke, from a BAE Systems plant in Wales to Deal in Germany to places in Bulgaria and Czechia that over time have been, those ones have been sabotaged. And then a few explosions. There was one in Pennsylvania as well. And now Northrop Grumman in, I don't know where this one is, but produce intercontinental ballistic missiles. It was completely destroyed by the explosion. And there you can see the picture of that that installation there. Anyway, I thought I'd report that. Now, going back to Germany, though, German military aid to Ukraine has updated the list of what's gone in the last 4 weeks. So this has gone from Germany in the last 4 weeks. Some of it I might have already previously talked about. But let's just go through these. 4 kinetic defense vehicles, 150 HF-1 loitering munitions. They're the ones that use AI. 10 Sonarbot 5 unmanned sea vehicles. They're the ones that can use sonar for mines under the water, and they're basically originally used for geographic topography, I think, underwater and whatnot. Anyway, a bunch of those going. 70 vector drones, 3 Susanna 2 self-propelled howitzers. The Susanna 2 is produced in Slovakia. They've finally gone, it seems, from Slovakia, paid for by Germany. 66 FFG MRAPs, 6 Berger Panzer 2 armored recovery vehicles, 2 mine plows, 4 Vicent 1 mine-clearing tanks, 3 border protection vehicles, 917 RGW-90s, 41 ground surveillance radars, about 4,000 G3 rifles, 800 assault rifles, RST, and both medium and short-range missiles, loads of rounds, shells, spare parts, infrared binoculars, laser rangefinders, tourniquets, sleeping bags, underwater scooters. And they've then further pledged 4 RST systems from a package announced last week. That's the air defense system. 120 Igla man-pads, man-portable air defense systems. That would be good news. 120 of those would be good. 30 RQ-35 hydrant drones, 316 vector drones, 1,100 ground surveillance radars, IRIS-T and IRIS-T-SL missiles, 300 of those from the package last week, and 30 Patriot missiles, again, pledged last week. So the Germans are still coming up with the goods at the moment, getting things into Ukraine, including things like MRAPs. This is, if you look at what the Ukraine has lost in Kursk, for example, they're going to need quite a lot of these sorts of vehicles, infantry fighting vehicles, MRAPs and APCs. Now, the EU confirms discussions on the possible deployment of military advisors to Ukraine. European Union is considering sending military advisors to Ukraine to organise training for the Ukrainian military, according to Anita Hipper, the European Commission spokesperson, at a press briefing. And we've heard that there are certain nations. We talked about France and the UK, but actually Denmark we talked about yesterday. Thinking about actually sending personnel to get trained by the Ukrainians on drone usage as well. So there are more frequent discussions about allied troops and trainers and instructors, logistics people and whatnot being inside Ukraine as the days go by. Now, French aid to Ukraine I think don't know what newspaper this is from. Is it Le Monde? Anyway, it's quite a long thread here. It's pretty much the whole article. But let's just dip into this a little bit. So, disagreements over sending troops to Ukraine are just the tip of the iceberg in a much tougher negotiations over the country's militarization, according to numerous European sources who are increasingly speaking out openly. Nearly 2 months after Trump officially launched peace negotiations between the Russians and Americans over the fate of Ukraine, series of summits and meetings at all levels among Kiev's Western allies increasingly resembles a long, endless tunnel. The main cause of the paralysis is well known: the total lack of transparency regarding the discussions between Moscow and Washington. So that's what we just heard. This is the actual article, from which these allies remain excluded. The discussions themselves are broader than they appear, since Russia wants to revisit the entire security architecture of the European continent. Nonetheless, there are many factors blocking progress on the Allies' side, at the risk of placing all of Kiev's supporters in a perilous exercise of diplomatic fiction, as a growing number of military and diplomatic sources complain behind the scenes. The disagreements over the issue of sending troops to Ukraine after a ceasefire are one example of this. Despite Paris and London's efforts to unite their forces to achieve this, their military leaders are not entirely aligned on the necessary means. The French are more favourable to a ground operation. The presence of troops in Romania since 2022, around 1,000 soldiers, and the subsequent structuring of a whole logistical support network from France would make this option easier. The British, on the other hand, would prefer a less direct approach, mixing air and naval means, as their army is very limited numbers. In London, as in other capitals, sending conventional ground troops, excluding special forces, is also considered politically risky. Hence the idea pushed for several weeks by Ukraine support groups backed by the United Kingdom is to negotiate instead a no-fly zone that, according to some maps, would draw a line from Belarus to the Black Sea, passing east of Kiev and Odessa. These differences are compounded by practical concerns about the budgetary implications of such measures. According to estimates drawn up in Paris, sending ground troops could mean, depending on certain options, investments of up to 2 or 3 billion euros, followed by an annual cost more or less equivalent to that of the Barkhane operation in the Sahel, 2014 to 2022, around 1 billion euros per year. That's sort of French spending. Now, this is something that's been talked about previously, that actually this is why NATO accession would be the cheapest option, because any other option involving security guarantees of troops on the ground is insanely expensive. If you're going to man, I don't know, over Europe, like 10, 15, 20,000 troops across Ukraine, that ends up costing an absolute ton of money. And no-fly zones operating them costs a ton of money. What you really want to do is allow Ukraine to do all this. It's the cheapest way of doing it, whilst allowing them into NATO, so that you have that deterrence without having to have your troops there. It's just absolutely insane that people are trying to take NATO accession off the negotiating table. The ability to fund these security guarantees to Ukraine is largely dependent for many allies on another important issue: the revision of the American military presence in Europe as part of the announced pivot towards Asia. And we're hearing more and more about this, potentially the Americans pulling out of a base in Spain that they've been in since, 1950s Franco time, I think. Just absolutely incredible that the US is just receding from the global power infrastructure that they have themselves created. At this stage, Washington has provided no indication of the potential troop withdrawal, which could involve up to 20,000 men. Allies hope to learn more on June the 24th and 5th at the annual summit of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO summit. Discussions on sending troops are only the tip of the iceberg in much tougher negotiations on the militarization of Ukraine. That's what I discussed earlier. As many European sources are increasingly admitting openly, this means ensuring that once the war is over, Kiev remains a solid barrier against Russia. This includes resizing its army, through a possible lowering of the conscription age, the level of training of its troops, and above all, the nature and size of its arsenals, which are directly linked to the purchase and maintenance of weapons. But here again, the Europeans are moving forward in a slow and unsupported manner, because for Kiev to be able to procure weapons, it needs money or suppliers, and this capability largely depends on discussions about the rearmament of Europe, launched on March the 4th by the European Commission, with the ambition of generating investments ranging from 150 billion euros to 800 billion. However, at present, there was no consensus on either the sources of funding for this rearmament, debt or Russian assets or private funds, or the allocation of this potential windfall, joint arms purchases, European or US equipment, etc., etc. So the European Union, NATO and other parliaments might only begin to synchronize their agenda with the necessary adoption of budgets in the summer or even autumn. All of these discussions ultimately come up against a new reality: the slowdown in the war and the maturing of the Ukrainian defense industry. After receiving significant aid, it is now capable of producing more than the Ukrainian budget allows. In recent months, this overproduction has mainly been purchased with the Danish funding due to the country's financial leeway, but Europeans are searching for other levers. At the same time, Kiev still desperately lacks certain equipment, particularly ground-to-air defense, but here an ultimate power struggle between Ukraine and its supporters, as discreet as it is crucial, is being played out. In this sector, Europeans are not meeting expectations. On April the 9th, Zelensky expressed his readiness to buy a significant batch of weapons from the US. He did not specify with what money. On the European side, many countries have urged their industries to ramp up production since 2022. Few have truly taken the risk, but for those who have played the game, the order book remains sometimes less full than hoped. In Paris, for instance, the possibility that Kiev could commit to acquiring AASM guided glide bombs from Safran for equipping Mirages is considered an integral part of the long road to peace. So on and so forth. So all of these things are kind of interconnected, and the challenge here is for well, you've got to release the money, and then you know there are all arguments about where you buy this stuff from. So, for example, SAMP-T NG, the new anti-ballistic missile protection system. They've got two SAMP-T batteries that can take out ballistic missiles, but I don't think they're as good as, say, the Patriots. Now, the newer version, you know, that they want to be having the production of that like happening now, and try and get that money to be spent on those SAMP-T MGs rather than the Patriots. But then the Ukrainians got all these Patriot systems sitting around, and they're getting more in. They need the missiles, but if the US is not playing ball, and all these moving parts, and you've got, you know, in Europe and the EU, 27 to 30 countries, you know, when you've got Norway and the UK and Switzerland, etc., etc. All of these countries having to come to some consensus on all of these different things. It's going to be really difficult. It really is very difficult, and that's a problem with democracies. Is, you know, you need everyone to agree. Anyway, a good insight into the problems there. Now, the UK MOD has tested a high-power microwave weapon called the Rapid Destroyer, developed by Taurus-led consortium. So actually, that's a French, although they do have British components to that, such as making the NLAW in Belfast. But anyway, it disables drone electronics using radio frequencies, according to the Financial Times. And here we have a video of this thing in action. This is from the British MOD.
A radio frequency directed energy weapon really comes into its own in being able to reach out and shut down electronics at range. An RF weapon is using radio frequency energy to get into that target and disrupt or damage its components directly. It is able to interact with the target instantaneously and then leave a lasting effect. The kind of weapon system that this project enables us to work towards. It's about equipping us for tomorrow's threats.
Now, this is actually pretty impressive. It's
radio frequency directed energy.
The MOD successfully trialed a radio frequency directed energy weapon that is capable of downing swarms of drones. There was actually more to this. Yeah, here. The trial neutralized 2 8-drone swarms with 100+ total drones defeated. It aims to counter mass drone warfare seen in Ukraine. But experts hail its wide area effect, they do caution it's not ideal for civilian zones. In other words, this could be quite dangerous to humans if you get those kind of microwave... if you get microwaved, basically. Imagine sitting in a microwave. So this looks really, really useful. And you would hope that they'll be battle testing this in Ukraine and get a whole bunch of these out on the front lines, and then that changes the war again. If you can suddenly neutralize drones have become everything about this war. If you're suddenly able to some degree, neutralize drones by microwaving the air, then people are back to the drawing board, and maybe artillery comes back in, and then it's, well, how do you counter the counter, and cat and mouse, etc., etc. But yeah, really interesting stuff there. Now, away from Ukraine to some degree, we are hearing that India wants to replace Russia in the international arms market. So Russia's receded. It was the second biggest arms exporter. Now that's France. Russia is struggling, obviously, to export anything due to the fact that they're needing to use it all themselves, and they're in quite a lot of trouble. And making this stuff is difficult. So I don't know whether they've been a top 10 anymore. But India, who used to buy a lot of stuff from Russia, have been building more and more of their own kit. And now they announced yesterday, I think it was, Reuters here, saying that India wants to replace Russia in the international arms market. Actually, they're also offering low loans in order to do that themselves from their import-export bank, which they're aiming at nations who would normally buy from Russia. So they really are stepping into Russia's shoes here, which then has an interesting effect on maybe the relationship within BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and all the other nations that are now part of it. Wow. So India muscling on Russia's territory there. Interesting. Now, Elon Musk's SpaceX and two partners have emerged, have emerged as frontrunners to win a crucial part of Trump's Golden Dome missile defense shield. This is like the Iron Dome of Israel. But who knew that one of the frontrunners would be Elon Musk's SpaceX, who aren't really known for their air defense systems, but hey ho, there you go. Could be in with a very good chance of winning that contract, and I'm sure it will pocket Elon Musk even more moolah. Peru wants to buy 12 Swedish Gripen JAS 39E F fighters. The reason I'm including this is because I don't know that's got anything to do with people being a bit worried about the American kit these days. But what you want is, I want Gripens to go to Ukraine, and in order for Gripens to go to Ukraine, it's not entirely contingent, but it'd be very useful if that production line is just moving along nicely. Thank you very much. But that's always going to be helped if there are foreign procurements of Gripen fighters. Just keep those orders coming in, and then if Ukraine suddenly need them, then it'll be easier to be able to factor that in. And then the more nations that are using Gripen, the more spare parts, the more general demand for everything to do with the logistics of the Gripen. That will benefit Ukraine if it eventually gets them. And we're pretty sure they will, because it's been factored into Swedish military aid package that's already gone through some time ago, which was kind of forward planning. They were securing spare parts for Gripens ahead of the Ukrainians using the platform. Now, I'm hoping that the Ukrainians are being trained on the Gripen already, and we just don't particularly know about it, and then suddenly Gripens appear in the skies above Ukraine. That's my hope, and that's what I lie in bed every night thinking of. Because that's how cool I am. And then finally, it seems the rumors are true. Russia is borrowing military hardware from Kazakhstan for Moscow's May the 9th parade, which is a parade that we're going to see Vucic, the Serbian leader, at, and also Robert Fico from Slovakia, very controversially, will be there. And some were even thinking Donald Trump could end up going there, and that would be a real kick in the teeth for Ukraine. So, yeah, Astana, Kazakhstan, we've got a load of kit suddenly leaving. It looks to go, one assumes, to Russia, to be, I guess, borrowed, to be put on parade, say, look how strong we are in Russia, when it's all Kazakhstan's equipment. And then the Russian equipment is just busily getting destroyed on the front line. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that's of use. Thank you very much for your support. Really appreciate it. Please don't forget that we are doing a Car for Ukraine Easter Pasanki, a campaign. At the moment, we're up to over $4,000, so that's fantastic. We put another 1,000 on that yesterday. That's amazing. Thank you to those of you who have contributed to that. Thanks to Aussie Rob there, an amazing amount. Simon Just, Chris Backer, Lee Renz, Carol Adams, all yesterday and today, and all those people who have already contributed. It's absolutely amazing. Thank you very much. We are working together with a whole bunch of YouTubers to raise money for all of 220,000 that is going to be, is at 20 trucks in total, 16 pickups, mainly Toyota Hiluxes and similar Mitsubishi L200s, 3 vans with 4x4 capabilities and a cargo van, and get them to Ukraine, to the front line. So that is where we're at. And at the moment, ATP Geopolitics in 4th place, but we only really started for proper yesterday. So let's move that up. Let's overtake that Jonathan Fink in 7th. Let's really get. I'd be happy to get into 5th place ahead of Rick the Ukrainian, and then I'll be happy with that. So we can do that, guys. Let's push this. We're going to push this over the next few weeks. Really would appreciate any help with that. The link is in the description below at atpgeo.com/donate. And it will send you to this page, or the ATP Geopolitics one. In the meantime, guys, thank you very much. Take care and speak to you soon.